This is the Inner Chief podcast, episode 313.
We all make mistakes. We all try to be the best version of ourselves, but it's often hard to see that. We often focus on the negative or what didn't work. And I love the Churchill quote: "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. What matters is the courage to go on." And I think when you're an entrepreneur, you get these sorts of highs and lows, and they can be exhausting. And over that process, I'd sort of forgotten who I was, forgotten the person that I used to be really proud of, and I wasn't in a good place. And so, more than anything, I went because I thought I needed to be alone.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief podcast, episode 313. And our guest today is world-renowned hotel developer Rory Hunter on spearheading the build-to-rent movement to sustainability, seeking solitude and healing on the ocean, and the adventure of a lifetime.
I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. And I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work. The Inner Chief podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. So every 2 weeks, I'll bring a deep diving interview with one of these CEOs or another one of a mid to large organisation so you can find your own path to greatness as an executive.
In this episode, I chat to Rory Hunter. Rory has led multiple organisations and spearheaded the development of award-winning properties across Australia and Southeast Asia, including the Song Saa Private Island, which was named one of the top 10 luxury hotel developments of the last decade globally. His latest venture model, a new Australian build-to-rent group, is committed to creating meaningful impact for future generations. Where he previously founded SoHo Partners, and in 2013 he established the Song Saa Foundation, an independent NGO dedicated to preserving Cambodia's marine environment. A highlight of the foundation includes creating the country's first ever marine national park in partnership with Monaco's Prince Albert. Rory has won numerous awards, including National Geographic's Leader in Sustainable Tourism, and is also a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a global board member of the Young Presidents Organisation Sports and Outdoor Network. Today, you're going to hear Rory talk all about how he harnessed the entrepreneurial spirit he possessed from a young age, going on an adventure of a lifetime by buying an island in his 20s and building an acclaimed resort on it. Build-to-rent development that considers the planet, local environment and the locals instead of just profit, and finding forgiveness, love, acceptance and inner peace by sailing solo across the ocean on his way home to Australia.
Chief, one of the core skills of all great chiefs is the ability to interview and recruit the very best performers to your team. Now, many chiefs say to me that they get up to 25 or even 40% of their recruitment decisions wrong. Now, many of you who listen to this show will know that over the last 6 years, we have asked dozens of CEOs what is their number one interview question when recruiting for senior roles. What we have done is turn that into an invaluable resource. It is the 30 most powerful interview questions used by CEOs to hire high performers. These are the questions that reveal the true nature of the person in front of you. They are the ones that give or create that truth-telling moment that will help you decide whether to hire or not. Chief, if you want this resource, just go to chiefmaker.com/interview and just pop in your details and download the detailed PDF.
Okay, Chief, let's hear from our incredible guest, Rory Hunter. Chiefs, I'm here with the one and only Rory Hunter, founder and CEO of Model. Rory, welcome to the Inner Chief podcast.
Hey, Greg, good to be here.
Mate, look, we have a wonderful tradition at the Inner Chief. We love to know where our CEOs come from. Can you tell a bit of a story that sums up your childhood and early life?
Yeah, sure thing. I was fortunate enough to grow up in pretty much the country, in the Blue Mountains. And so we had a little hobby farm, and I was always coming up with ideas for how to make money. And I think my first business was I was 4, and Mum was throwing out some old magazines, and I thought, oh, we could sell these. And so I went and created a little store just out the front on the dirt road and sold them for, I think it was like 1 cent, and managed to sell a few of these things. And so as the years went on, I, saw that we had all these excess eggs. And so we set up an honesty shop out the front. Around Christmas, we had lots of Christmas bush growing in the bush at our place. And so I'd call up the local florists and, see if they wanted to buy it from us. And so I was really always coming up with these ideas, and I think where I was really blessed was my parents never said they were crazy, so they would always support them, no matter how. And to this day, and they would always be there if they didn't work out. And so I think one of the things that I was really fortunate was to have that real confidence that no matter what, my mum and dad were there, and so that really gave me that confidence to dream big and to, come up with ideas, knowing that I'd always be loved and I'd never be judged.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful, isn't it? So what was your first ever job outside of selling magazines for 1 cent? Did you ever find something with a better margin than that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, 14 and 9 months, to the day, I was down at Macca's. Filled out an application form and got a job and absolutely loved it. And it really gave me, not just the freedom and independence of earning your own income, but for the first time allowed me to go, okay, well, what would this, where could I get to from this? And so all I ever wanted to do as a kid was to become a ski instructor. And my parents weren't skiers. And for some bizarre reason, I was just obsessed with the snow. And so managed to earn up enough money to go and stay with my uncle when I was 16, and did a course and then got my level 1 Canadian ski instructor certificate, and then came back, continued to work my tail off at Macca's, ended up becoming a crew trainer, and saved up enough money to get a flight to Canada when I finished school. And so obviously this is pre-internet. And so I found a brochure with all of these hotels in Banff. And so I wrote each one of them a letter, seeing if they'd like, a young Aussie to come and work for them. And the Lake Louise Inn wrote back and gave me a job as a housekeeper. And so that was like so exciting because it came with accommodation. It was right on the hill. And so 2 days after my HSC, I was on a plane, cleaning rooms, in the absolute best place on the planet to ski, but I really used that as a stepping stone. Within a couple of weeks, I went and knocked on the ski school door and said, "Hey, do you guys need anyone to help?" And it was just really good fortune. They had 400 pilots coming the next week, and so they needed some extra help. And so the ski school director took me out, and we did the formal part of the interview on the chairlift, and we were then skiing down. And at Lake Louise, there was a dual slalom course just at the end of the front run. And he looked over and he said, "I'll tell you what, if you can beat me, you've got yourself a job." And mind you, this is my whole sort of childhood life coming up to this one moment. And, in hindsight, I'm sure he let me win, but we stopped, and he said to me, let's go sign the papers. And to this day, one of the top 5 moments of my life.
So good. So good. I actually went to Lake Louise many years ago, 2005, 6. I spent about a week. It might have even been at Lake Louise Inn. There's not a lot of hotels there, so what a magical
it's a special spot.
It is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, absolutely. Okay, mate, before we get into the career proper, what was your first ever car?
I was a Jeep Wrangler, and I bloody loved
Oh,
that car.
wow.
And
That is a cool
I just
first
couldn't help
car.
myself. I tricked it
Yep.
up, got the big wheels and the suspension,
Yes.
and my
Yep.
mates and I really got into full driving and just adventure after adventure. And the
Yeah.
girl I was seeing at the time, Gemma, we were both at uni, and we thought we'd take the summer and travel around Australia. So we did the Tanami up to Broome, and basically from Broome drove
Yep.
the coast all the way back to Sydney. Um,
Outstanding.
I just I loved what that car gave me. It was this sort of opportunity
Yeah.
to just do interesting things.
It's a fun. I've actually got one now. I've got one of the new ones, and they are
Yeah,
just
they're pretty
fun.
fun.
I'd get the kids in the back. I'd take the roof off. We'd go down the beach, and they just love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's hard not to
Okay,
smile when you're cruising around in one.
it is, mate. When you don't have the roof on your car, you go down to the beach. Outstanding. Okay, mate. So, how on earth did you end up in Cambodia and the Song Saa project?
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been much more random. I had an internet marketing agency, and I'd sold it, and was then working in a really senior role for someone of my sort of age, mid-20s. I was working at Saatchi and Saatchi and running the country's
Yep.
largest account. And really, the plan was to move to New York, which is sort of the epicenter of advertising, and another dream, a bit like the ski instructor dream. And on the way there, we were in Indochina, just doing a few things, and we met this guy in Cambodia whose father was a fisherman, and he told us these stories about these islands off the coast that were virgin rainforest, white sandy beaches, oceans teeming with
Mm,
fish, and really just sounded too good to be true. And
mm,
this was at a stage when Cambodia was post-conflict, but very, very peaceful. And it looked like it was on this really fascinating trajectory to become a real poster child for post-war democracy in Asia. Um, there was nothing in any guidebook, Lonely Planet, or anything about this so-called archipelago off the coast. There was nothing online. It was back in the day when you could do a Google search and it would come up with zero. Um,
yeah.
but what there was Google Earth. It had just launched. And so from a
Ah,
satellite, we could see that this place looked pretty spectacular. And so we found this fisherman who agreed to take us out there for a couple of weeks. And every day we'd be at a different beach, each more beautiful than the next, swimming, fishing, just exploring. And there was zero tourism infrastructure out there. I don't mean zero. There were 3
mm,
villages. And on the last day, we stopped in this little island just to see if we could buy some food. And we got chatting through an interpreter with one of the locals who basically owned the island. And we were the first foreigners he ever met. And so he wanted to move back to the mainland. And so he asked if we wanted to buy it for $15,000. And, I was in my late 20s, and that seemed like a pretty low price for an island. By that stage, we'd absolutely fallen in love with the archipelago, and it just seemed like one of those opportunities you'd never get again. And so
yep.
we agreed on the spot. We came back a week later, a little brown paper bag full of USD, and got the local Navy to witness the thumbprint. You don't sign over there for deals, you thumbprint. And then that became what truly was the adventure of a lifetime.
So, how on earth did you build a hotel in an area where there's no infrastructure at all, and then grow that? How did that all come about? Well, actually,
Yeah, I
can
tell
you
you
just
what, it
maybe
wasn't
can we just
easy.
jump to the end a bit? Can we jump to the end a bit? So, what did it become? What was the end game? Because I think then people will understand that there was an incredible journey here.
Yeah, so it's ended up becoming one of the top 10 resorts in the world, um, which is no easy feat. Certainly when you've never done it before, and it's never
Yep.
been done in that country before. Um, and so like so often you go to bed with a dream and wake up with a purpose. And so I was doing it with my partner, and we used to have these sessions we'd call couch streaming, and we'd sit there with a glass of wine and just dream about the future that we'd hoped for.
Hmm.
And it was really powerful and really beautiful. And it was just such a special part of the world that we thought that the economic growth would really take off, and that this would be a way to do something quite significant. But I think we're also very idealistic, right? It was the first project of any kind to be developed on the coast, and so it both came with this beautiful opportunity, but deep sense of responsibility to lead by example. And so it wasn't about building the world's most beautiful resort. It was really about building one that reflected our values. And so, I do a lot of free diving, and multiple times I felt the reverberation of dynamite fishing while I was under the water. You could really see the damage that was happening to the fisheries and the ecosystem. And then at the same time, we spent a lot of the early years with working with these local communities, mainly women. Whenever we asked for some help, it was always the women that came and did the labour. The men were either fishing, gambling, or sleeping. And through conversations with the women, we really understood how tough it was in these villages. They were the quintessential poverty trap. If you were born into this village as a woman, there was no opportunity. As a man, it was fishing, which is declining. And the only two opportunities other than that were illegal logging or illegal poaching. And there was no access to healthcare. There's no access to education. And so pretty early on, we could see that we could weave together all those different stakeholder interests, the communities, the environments, what our end guests would want, what the government would want, what we assumed and hoped our investors would want, more than anything through common sense. And we truly thought and hoped that by doing that, it could be a catalyst for much broader change. If we could demonstrate there was a way for tourism to really be an approach for lifting people out of poverty, for providing a framework for environmental protection, then that could be an idea that kind of was ripe for its time. Because this is, of course, maybe 18 years ago now. And so we started off quite small. We created the first ever marine reserve around our little island. And that took quite a bit of time. You're really having to build up trust and understanding with the local communities. So we created a local community fishery to manage the reserve. And then that was really successful. And so a lot of it was education and taking them on that journey. And then we managed to form a fantastic partnership with Prince Albert, who's a huge marine conservationist. And then in partnership with him and the Ministry of Environment, we were able to turn that into a 400 square kilometre marine national park, the first of its kind in Cambodia. And then at the same time, we sort of looked at, what are the social aspects that we can contribute to, and how do we use the platform of a hotel to drive broader positive change? And I used to sort of say the hotel is like the pebble in the pond, and the foundation that we created is the ripple of impact. And we looked at that sphere of influence and where we could really believe we could make a difference. And obviously, the marine conservation side was a no-brainer, but the community was another major aspect. And so we started off very humbly. There was no waste management system. That sort of shows you how rudimentary these villages were. Rubbish would be thrown on the ground, and there would be no institutional infrastructure to manage that, to whisk it off the ground, take it away, and put it somewhere. And so we created a solid waste management system, which was really effective. Cleaned up the village, just transformed it, and the sort of sense of pride that they went through was amazing. And then the more we collaborated, the more they could see. It's that old saying, don't tell me how good you are, show me. And as we were able to demonstrably sort of show them that we really cared and we really meant what we said, the trust continued to build and to grow. And obviously, as we were going through the development of the resort, there was a lot of labour. And more importantly, when we opened the resort, it wasn't just labour. So we were giving people jobs. I think more importantly, we were giving them a vocation. And that then is something that's tradable. And that's how you get out of the poverty trap. You've got a skill that you can that's portable, and you could move elsewhere and you can get out of that village. At the same time, without access to education and healthcare, the opportunities are pretty limited. And so we created a primary school for the kids, and then partnered with the Ministry of Education to operate it. And then we would do annual medical missions where we would fly over 40 doctors from the US. They'd stay at the hotel at the sort of the quietest time of year, and they'd bring over a few $1 million worth of supplies, and we do clinics in all these outer lying villages, everything from women's health to nutrition. Rates of malnutrition out there were dire. There was one time, for example, the clinic was there, and a woman had just given birth, and the bleeding couldn't be stopped. And thankfully, we were able to get her on a speedboat with two of the doctors straight to the mainland. And just by good fortune, we're able to save her life. And so it was a very different approach to development that you'd have in Australia, where you build the building and you don't really worry about anything else. For us, it was the absolute opposite. We were 30 kilometers off the coast, young, inexperienced. We had to sort of look at what's the most sensible way to do this. How do we collaborate? How do we align interests? How do we do something that reflects our values, but that is really meaningful, that guests will want, that is, this sort of global exemplar for how tourism can be this game changer. And so it was obviously pretty difficult, but it was so meaningful that it meant that it was worth it.
Chief, one of the core skills of all great chiefs is the ability to interview and recruit the very best performers to your team. Now, many chiefs say to me that they get up to 25 or even 40% of their recruitment decisions wrong. Now, many of you who listen to this show will know that over the last 6 years, we have asked dozens of CEOs what is their number one interview question when recruiting for senior roles. What we have done is turn that into an invaluable resource. It is the 30 most powerful interview questions used by CEOs to hire high performers. These are the questions that reveal the true nature of the person in front of you. They are the ones that give or create that truth-telling moment that will help you decide whether to hire or not. Chief, if you want this resource, just go to chiefmaker.com/interview and just pop in your details and download the detailed PDF.
Rory, I'm fascinated by turnarounds and transformation in foreign jurisdictions. I spent a lot of time working in Africa with mining companies that have a similar spirit to what you're talking about, that actually, I think the purpose was to change the way mining was done in Africa. And I'll never forget when we first turned up to run a series of mines, the level of mistrust was unbelievable. Like you could feel the spears coming out of their eyes, and fully justified, because the people that came before us were, did a horrible job of engaging the community. But these projects, they have so much risk. Like, it's really hard to see around the corner. Like, you've got to incorporate that into strategy, into culture, into financial management. It just affects every part of your business when you're in these really complex cultural environments. So there's language barriers, multiple tribes, I imagine. Really, really tricky. My question is, in your strategic program process, how did you manage that? And what advice would you give people who are operating in complex multicultural environments, probably outside of their own?
Yeah, I think maybe jump to that second question first. I think when anything's possible, which is intoxicating, right? You go to these frontier markets.
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, it's truly intoxicating because you're like, oh my God, we could do this, we could do that. It also means that everything's difficult. And I think that's the part that is hard-won wisdom.
Yep.
And I think it's country risk. Country risk was something I'd always come up with when I'd be raising capital. I mean, the Song Saa Island was a $30 million project, so there's a decent amount of capital to raise. And so you're always talking about country risk, and I would often see it as as binary. The country becomes a failed state. But what I learned is it's something more nuanced. And if I look at the trajectory of Cambodia from being this sort of poster child for Western aid and democracy to effectively becoming a vassal state of China, and for the corruption to be getting far worse than better, they're changes that you just can't control. And the same thing that, you have all these beautiful ideas, but if they're not done within a regulatory framework that supports that, then sadly corruption wins over ideology every day of the week. To answer the first question, I look at it like a tapestry. They're very, very complex places to deal with, to do business in. And so for me, step one was always be cognizant that I'm a guest and it's their home, not mine. And humility is the most important character trait when trying to build trust. And we see it in Australia, right? If you're from the mainland, you go down to Tasmania, they're not going to be that trusting, right? And so this is not just an international thing. This is small city, big city, anywhere on the planet. And so I think it's really understanding that. And so asking questions, listening, making sure that they don't perceive you as a threat, and that you're not coming in with ideas, you're not belittling them, you're not disrespecting them. I think that's like step one. But then it's really trying to understand all the different aspects to the playing field. So that's everything from who are the companies involved and understanding, who they are, understanding the individuals involved at a professional level, at a political level, at a local level. Again, it's sort of like this 3D chessboard that just layers on top of each other. It's understanding the policy framework, the political players and sort of broader trends, not just economic growth, but where things are evolving in a broader cultural sense. And so it's kind of each tapestry lays upon the other. And it's a little bit like, I'd often say, it's a little bit like walking into a room with the lights turned out. There's an exit somewhere, you just don't know where it is. And so you're constantly stubbing your toe. And so the more you can illuminate that room with information, just about how things are structured, I think in 3 dimensions. And so for me, it's just there's so many moving parts anywhere you go, no matter what you do or where it is. It's just easier in Australia because the cultural aspects and the political aspects and the regulatory aspects we kind of know inherently. Whereas when you're going in there, you need to have a framework for really trying to understand that, because until you understand it, you can't navigate it.
You just said something then I've not heard someone say before, which is you said you think in 3 dimensions. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I think that there are people that think in ideas and visual thinkers and sort of more linear thinkers. So, as a developer, I'd often go to a site and go, like, look at what we could build here. We could do this. It's going to be amazing. And they're just looking at me blankly going, what are you talking about? And so what I mean by that is you look at something and you see what could be rather than what's already there.
Sure. Yeah. Was there ever a moment you thought to yourself, like, even with all the capital behind you and the support, and you just thought, nah, this isn't going to work? Ever one of those moments where
there were so many. The two that jump out though, one is we sort of approached it originally as a developer and as a pure developer. And so it took about 2.5 years to create the legal tenure for us to own the island, because nobody ever had in Cambodia's history. So that was a really complex process. And then concurrent to that, it was, how do you commercialize one? And so we pretty quickly gravitated to the Maldives model, small, high end. We had a whole bunch of designs, feasibility in place. We had our debt at term sheet stage out of Mauritius. We had a private equity group out of San Francisco. We had Amman Resorts ready to do it. We kind of had pulled all those pieces together. And then a week or 2 before Lehman Brothers crashed, my partner was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And so we were on the first plane back to Australia. Then the GFC hit, and basically the whole 3 years worth of work imploded overnight. And against all of our family's recommendations, once she got better, we thought, you know what, like, we've got each other, we've got these two little islands. Let's go back and give it another crack. But this time, we'll just do it ourselves. We'll create our own hotel management company. My wife could design it. What's the worst that can happen? And so that's what we did. We sort of started again, and she started sketching, and I raised a bit more money, and that's the resort that you see today. And the other time that comes to mind, we opened on December 23rd. And just a side note to any budding hotelier, do not open a hotel 3 days before Christmas. It's not a good idea. And we basically had 230 staff that were on another island. So they caught the boat over every morning. Senior staff lived on our island, but most of the staff lived on the other island. And then, of course, the guests came in. We woke up Christmas morning. My mum and dad were there. Dad was going to dress up as Santa, and it was going to be a lovely day. And lo and behold, this huge pressure system came in and was blowing 30 to 40 knots from the northeast. And the waves were so big, the staff couldn't get to work. We had this restaurant built out over the water that looks straight out over the horizon. And these huge rolling waves were just like coming under the restaurant and then slapping against the wall. And it meant guests couldn't get there, staff couldn't get there. And we just hugged each other and we just said, what have we done? Our hearts just absolutely sunk, because, of course, as a developer, you've spent years of force of will getting the thing open. And as an operator, your job just begun. And it was pretty brutal. But thankfully, the wind calmed down. Dad put on his Santa suit and went and spoke to all the guests. And they were all very understanding. And by dinner time, I was able to drive the boat over, get the rest of the guests in, and we had a lovely evening. And, it was just another chapter to the adventure.
Fantastic. So, mate, eventually you shifted to Hong Kong and you were involved there in growing a series of hotels. How did the journey progress from Cambodia to Hong Kong? How did all that come about?
Yeah, I mean, private islands aren't renowned for making lots of money. They're the sort of thing that billionaires buy because they've got lots of cash. I'm not aware of any other organization that's bought an island and then built a business from that. And so we needed to scale and believe that we needed to be near capital providers and the sorts of people that could get us there. And so Hong Kong was the place we chose. We had all our holding company structures there, and I'd really put a lot of effort into other projects, but really, a couple of years into building a significant long-term strategy for us to be able to build the next Six Senses, basically, a Southeast Asian sort of purpose-driven hotel company. And so I'd spent sort of 3 years building all that out, and we were just about to launch that capital raise, like a 9-figure capital raise. So it wasn't small. And then COVID hit, and I think that's where the whole journey was amazing, but we were swimming against the current the whole time, and that really takes its toll. And I sort of looked down the barrel of, the options in front of me. One was to wait it out and to, see what the future held. The other one was, I really missed Australia. And over that time, I'd seen what had happened to the coast, and none of it reflected my values. And it wasn't a place that I wanted to do business anymore. It went in the opposite direction that I'd hoped. And so for me, it was one of those junctions where you're like, okay, I've got to give the next 10 to 15 years of my life to this. Is that what I want to do? meanwhile, my wife and I had separated. We had adopted 3 children. One of them had just been admitted to a psychiatric ward, and it was just too much. It was just too much. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't believe in emerging markets anymore. I really missed Australia, and I really wanted, I knew I had one startup left in me, and I really wanted it to drive meaningful change. And I knew that I didn't believe I could do that at scale in frontier markets. And so it was this truly brutal culmination of events that all sort of happened at once. And it was pretty tough.
So in the end, this led you to coming back to Australia, but the journey back was not on Cathay Pacific. You decided to sail home, and you actually, there's a little sort of video blog you did on this little thing called Seeking Solitude. I just want to read something from that and ask you a couple of questions. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You said this: out there on the open ocean, I found forgiveness, love, and acceptance of all that I am, an inner peace I'd forgotten existed. But while I thought what I needed was to be alone, I realised it's human connections that make us whole, that bring us happiness and let our hearts soar. A simple truth I'd forgotten in my quest to become a successful entrepreneur. A truth I hold now as the keystone of my being. Now, what do you mean by this?
Well, I think maybe I'll take a couple of steps back.
Sure.
It had been such a big chapter in Asia. I really wanted to demarcate that in some way. Sort of one last adventure. I think agency is such a huge part of the human experience. And so with all this chaos happening in my professional and private life, this felt like one thing that could be mine. And obviously I was, grieving and really sad. And so I was reading a lot of Henry Thoreau at the time. And, he's got some great perspectives on the healing power of nature. And for a whole bunch of reasons, I thought, yeah, you know what, I'm going to sail home. And partly because I thought that'd be a good place to, cry and to heal. Partly because I thought it'd be a way to go home on my terms rather than, the proverbial tail between my legs. And I think the third thing looking back is that, when we are under immense stress, our cognition's seriously impaired. And so I look back at myself then and think, mate, what were you thinking? You've never actually done a night solo ever before. And so, it's a long way. It's 4,000 nautical miles. It took 6 weeks. So I think it's a long way of saying that, we all make mistakes. We all try to be the best version of ourselves. But it's often hard to see that. We often focus on the negative or what didn't work. And I love the Churchill quote, success is not final, failure is not fatal. What matters is the courage to go on. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, you get these sorts of highs and lows, and they can be exhausting. And over that process, I'd sort of forgotten who I was. I'd forgotten the person that I used to be really proud of, and I wasn't in a good place. And so more than anything, I went because I thought I needed to be alone. But what I realized is that the things that matter are those people you love. I took a sat phone, had a special number, and I had a special email that compressed the data and sort of sent it off, but no attachments or anything. So I had SMS and email, and so I only gave that number to people that I really, really cared about. And so it meant that I was always connected. My mum, every morning, first thing she'd do is she'd wake up and send me a message, probably just to make sure I was alive. But I spoke to my friends more in that 6 weeks and my parents than I had, the last 6 months. And all the noise from, the chaos of COVID and media and shareholders and staff and, that just peeled away. And so, I read lots and I was terrified probably half the time. But there's nowhere to hide out there. It's simply just you. And so, success or failure is really on your own shoulders. And so there's something really quite beautiful about that. There were so many times when, just the first night I left Hong Kong Harbour and this huge storm rolled in. And keeping in mind, I had never done a full overnight solo. And this storm was about 45 knots of breeze. And for anyone that spent time in the ocean, that's serious wind. And so what happens in that sort of wind speed is that the ocean gets really tall and it gets very, very loud. And I was in the South China Sea, which is the second busiest shipping lane in the world. And visibility was at probably a couple hundred meters. And so I would see all these merchant vessels sort of bearing down on me on different vectors on my AIS system and basically just sort of trying to weave through them with the autopilot because it was so terrifying on deck with all this wind that I was really just doing everything I could to just get through. But I wasn't turning back. Like there was not one part of me that was ever going to turn back. So that's what I mean by, I think my cognition was fairly impaired. It wasn't a death trip, but, I was going home no matter what.
A bit like a rebirth more than a death. Hey, you said one thing that you realised along the journey that the ocean has a rhythm. You started to realise that the ocean has its own rhythm. How did you come to feel that, and what did you notice? What was the evidence of that?
At a simplistic level, it's the sun rising, sun setting, the rhythm throughout the day of just the light and the way it reflects off the waves. But at a more deeper level, it's the constant changing. Sometimes you'd be having a beautiful afternoon, and then the next thing you know, this black wall of squall comes through and knocks you sideways, and it's blowing 30 knots and rain bellowing into your face, and then 2 hours later it's gone and it's becalmed. And so what I meant by that is that the one constant out there is change. It's never ever ever the same. And some people would say, "Oh, didn't you get bored looking at the horizon?" And I'd be like, "No, because it was never the same." You think that the horizon is the horizon, but it's really not. It changes so often. And I think as humans we really struggle with change. We want certainty, but of course we can't get it. And so by embracing that change and thinking about it as a rhythm, you get a beautiful sunset, but then you get a squall at 3 a.m. and your body's wiping sleep out of your eyes, getting pelleted in the face with the rain and desperately trying to work out which way is up. And then the next day you'll see a pod of dolphins welcoming you across the equator. And so it's the ebbs and the flows, the goods, the bads, that's what I meant by a rhythm. And I think, that's what life's about. It's always changing, but just when you think it couldn't get any worse, something beautiful happens.
There's a great saying I heard once, which was, spend some time living at the speed of nature. And it's a really cool little saying, I think. We all need to do a bit more of that.
Yeah, it's a good quote.
Okay, Chief, more from Rory in a minute. Now, last year, we had the wonderful Roger Love on the show. Roger is the world's #1 voice coach, and he has mentored stars like Reese Witherspoon, Bradley Cooper, and even poor old me, Greg. We spoke about the components of your voice and landing the message with your people. Here's what Roger had to say about using your voice to amplify your personal brand.
The number one reason is people come because they're losing their voice. The number one reason they should come is because people believe that the voice they have was the voice they were born with, and it's not true. They were born with an instrument, and you have to learn how to play it.
You can listen to that incredible chat with Roger Love by going to chiefmaker.com/311. Righto, Chief, let's get back to the remarkable Rory Hunter, build-to-rent industry pioneer. Now, listen, let's talk about now. A new chapter has begun for you this year. You've returned to Australia. The startup is off and running. It's called Model, and this is build to rent, regenerative, decarbonisation, rent for good. Can you tell us in your own words how this has all come about and what Model is actually going to do?
Yeah, so when I came back, I took some time out just to think about things, and I sold my stake in Song Saa and really knew I had another solid 10 to 15 years in me of a startup, but just wasn't sure. And this is probably 2 years ago, at a time when I sort of heard these snippets of this build to rent thing, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder what that is. And the more I sort of scratched that itch, the more I realized it was very, very similar to my previous business, where you've got long-term ownership. It's very customer focused. It's all about how do you deliver a great experience for your tenants. It's primarily an operational business. So again, just like a hotel, as soon as it's built, that's in essence the easy part. And so that broader notion of stakeholder alignment, I could see could apply in very, very similar ways in build to rent, where you're building for the long term. And so that ability to spend the extra money up front so that it's a sort of global best practice, both operational and embodied carbon and just the materials that you use, that ability to really take everything I'd learned in the hotel business and apply it in a way that hadn't been done in Australia. And so as an entrepreneur, I was like, oh, that's really cool. As a hotelier, I'm like, I get it. And then I sort of started to realize, okay, as someone that really wants to have meaningful impact, the fascinating thing here is Australia's got these sort of three concurrent crises. We've got the climate crisis, a housing crisis, and a mental health crisis. And so my starting point was, well, could the built form, specifically build to rent, help address all three? And if it could, how could I be a part of that? And how could I compete? And what would be my competitive advantage, given it's effectively institutionalized from day one? And so that's when I applied that, that fabric sort of framework that I used in Asia, in Australia, to really, understand, well, who are all the different players? What are they doing? How do they make it work? Understanding that all the aspects of the market, the numbers, what was happening to the Australian sort of housing landscape and how it was evolving, how the capital markets were looking at this, and all the different aspects to a feasibility, who the support people were in the market, really just building up that sort of base knowledge to go, okay, if that's how it all comes together, is there a space where I could compete? And in essence, I thought there was, but I really wanted to just to make sure that my thinking was sound. Probably because I, jumped into buying an island and, didn't really think about the rest until I was in it. And I really wanted to make sure that my next business was really well thought out strategically, and that it wasn't driven by, a passionate idea. It was driven by sound logic. And so I spent 6 months writing a white paper to, in essence, sort of say, well, is it too expensive to build sustainably? And more importantly, how do we decarbonize the economy, and what role can the built form have in that? And so it was a really fun process. I enjoy writing, and it allowed me to, I hadn't just mapped out who the best players were. It gave me an opportunity to sit down with them, understand their view on build to rent, understand their view on decarbonisation, look at all the different policy levers that were coming in place, look at, speaking to capital allocators, organisations like Clean Energy Finance Corporation, who's sort of the government's green bank, and really understand their view on how property can be a part of this decarbonisation solution. And in essence, it ended up being sort of part thesis, part white paper, really about how do we address these concurrent crises in a way that takes a whole systems approach and can be done at scale. And so I published that probably about 2 months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, at the same time as I launched Model. And really what we're trying to do is to be the leaders in decarbonising Australian housing. The incumbents are constrained by these sort of historical views of how do they approach the risk-return ratio, how do their investors view cost versus cap rate, etc. But there's a whole new wave of organisations, institutional companies and banks and super funds and just capital allocators that have committed to our 2030 targets and beyond. And so my view is that we can really create this global exemplar of decarbonising housing and open up to capital sources that traditional developers just wouldn't be able to, because their sort of short-term view of it's all about the lowest cost and the quickest return, as opposed to our view, which is the highest value and the maximum long-term return. And I think that so much of Australian housing is broken, but particularly the way we sell apartments. They're not professionally managed, which means that tenants have invariably a really bad experience. They don't have any tenure security, so that means they can't invest in the neighbourhood they live. They're constantly anxious about how long they'll be there. They're not treated like a customer. It's a sort of huge power imbalance. And because the developers' incentives are really about short-term returns, there's no incentive to really build global exemplar projects. And what I love about build to rent is it flips that on its head, and it means that it's all about the customer. How do we give Australian renters more than just tenure security? How do we make them? How do we allow them to feel proud of where they live? How do we give them the confidence to put roots into their neighbourhood and invest in their local community? And how do they get to know and become friends and trust their neighbours? I think a huge part of life, be it the people that are in our sphere of influence or those that our organisations touch, is creating a sense of safety and security. There's just two human basics that we all desire, is safety and security. And there's no better way to do that than through housing. And I think that the problem with the way that we've delivered rental product in Australia hasn't given people a sense of safety and security. And so, again, if you look at all of those different stakeholders, we start with the customer. What are they looking for? If we start with the broader community, what are they looking for? If we sort of then look at our investors, what are they looking for? It's a return, but it's over a longer period. And so if you can have highly motivated and really loyal customers, if you de-risk a project in a way, because we'll be dealing with a very, very different world 20 years from now, not just at a climate level, but at a policy level, at a customer expectation level. And so we need to build for that future. And so it means you spend a bit more upfront now, but what you've got is this project that's inherently resilient and it's therefore de-risked. And by reducing risk, it means you deliver greater return. And so just as we found with the island, once you map out all those different stakeholders, you understand what they need, then you can start to build an organization that means you've got stakeholder alignment. Whereas traditionally, property in Australia has all been about maximising returns, not really caring about the neighbourhood, the customer, i.e. the tenant, or even the person buying the apartment. and certainly not the local community. And so it all feels so familiar to me. I built a business over 16 years with this sort of core philosophy of, how can property drive positive change? And I know for many Australians that would sound like an oxymoron, but I've seen it firsthand. I can see what you can do if you use that platform that you're creating to really weave in all those broader interests, and it's a powerful model.
Rory, what's the best way for people to support or learn more? I mean, the white paper, is that the best way? Because we'll definitely distribute that.
Go to themodel.com.au. We're in the process of building out our pipeline in Melbourne.
Yep.
So our aim is to have 1,000 apartments up and running in the next 12 months. And we're also in the process of bringing in an institutional partner. It's not a small business. Our first sort of fund, if you like, will be circa 500 million. But the plan is for this to be a multi-billion-dollar platform within the next 5 years. And it's, if you look at the numbers, basically build to rents at 0.2% of the housing market at the moment, which equates to, it's about, call it 20 billion. We're about 5 years behind the UK. Once we get to their penetration of about 3%, you're looking at a $300 billion asset class. We're about 20 years behind the US based on their penetration. This is a in today's dollars, a $2+ trillion asset class. So we're talking really, really significant growth potential. But the cost of entry is just so high. And that's where I think there's a very narrow window for an entrepreneur like me to come in with an idea, but ideas need capital to scale. And so, today I'm self-funded, but for this to become, the impact that I believe it can, that's where having the institutional capital is key.
Rory, this has just been fantastic, and we'll put all those details into the show notes. If you've got 5 more minutes, should we do the closing rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
Righto. Okay. If you could form the ultimate executive team, right? Any well-known leader from any time in history, who would your first 3 picks be, and what role would you give them?
I think I'd start out with a great chairman, and probably Charlie Munger comes to mind.
Okay.
He's just got so many pearls of wisdom, and I feel like, if I Charlie as my chair, I'd be able to go, right, Charlie, I've got this idea, and I think if we can do this, this, and this, we can do that. And he'd be like, that's really interesting, but what if you just did this bit differently? I think having someone to nudge you in the right direction is always really helpful. I think another piece, because this is such an operational business, my hotel idol is Isidore Sharp, who's the founder of Four Seasons. And what he created at the time that he created it was such a strong service offering that meant you could put Four Seasons on a building and you could get 20% more room rate than you could if a competitor had it. And it was all down to the service. And for me, that's going to be the real long-term differentiator for build to rent, is how do you make your customers feel? And that's why someone will want to choose one of our places to live over someone else's. And then the other role I'd want to fill would be a CFO. Again, I think every entrepreneur needs a steady hand, financially by their side. And so probably, it'd probably be like, say, someone like Janet Yellen, who's like got the grey hair, but who's just such a wizened stalwart of capital markets, and could really help sort of thread that needle from idea to institution, which is effectively what we're trying to do with Model, which is not easy. And so it's having, these, if I had that team around me, look out.
Yep. Yeah, that would be a good team. Okay. What's the best advice a mentor or coach has ever given you?
I think for me personally, it's just slow down. I'm someone that can make quick decisions easily, and that sometimes is a strength. It's often not. The first idea is often not the best idea. And so as I've gotten older, I've really made sure I reflect on things more, and I take my time. I don't react. I use a different part of my brain to really think things through. So yeah, slow down.
What is your number one interview question when hiring someone for your leadership team?
I think the job of a CEO is to really focus on three things. So finance and strategy. The third one is culture. And so I think you need to assume there's key technical skills there. I would always hire on attitude over aptitude. Certainly that's what I learned at Song Saa, going from 0 to 230 staff in the space of a few months, to deliver, one of the highest levels of service that's intangible, but to do it uniformly with a relatively uneducated workforce meant that it was all about culture. You can get away with a lot of mistakes if you're a good person, you're kind, and you smile. Um, and so it's really trying to understand, is that candidate, is it the right culture? And will they fit within the culture that we're trying to create? And that's the hardest part to work out. It's easy to work out if someone's got the hard skills. It's often very, very hard to work out if they've got the cultural fit. And I would choose having the right cultural fit over technical skills every day of the week, because you can train the hard stuff, the hard skills. We are who we are. Some of us will work in this environment, but not the other, and that's not. And if you hire the wrong person culturally, that's on you. It's not on them.
Yep. If can you nominate another CEO you have with great respect you think should be on the podcast?
Yeah, so I'm in an organization called YPO, or Young Presidents Organization, and so it's every month we have a forum, which is basically 7 other CEOs that get together and really do a deep dive on our personal and professional and family lives, and it's this beautiful, safe environment of mutual support. And so I'd probably choose one of my forum buddies, James Ajaka. So he's the chairman and CEO of Darrell Lea. And what I love about James is his story of how he became a CEO. He wasn't great at school. His first job was cleaning pots at a restaurant, and he absolutely loved it. He loved it because he could get a positive response from the effort he put in. And he would always know that no matter what, he'd be the hardest worker in the room. And through good fortune, he became the second employee at Nudie, went on to become the CEO, did well on the exit, and from there was a partner in Allied Pinnacle, sold that, and is now both the CEO and a key investor in Darrell Lea. And what I love about James's story is it's a real testament to hard work, but he's also one of the kindest people you'll meet. You wouldn't know it when you first meet him, but what you realize is that under that skin there's a very supportive, nurturing, very family focused, kind human being.
Yeah, sure. Outstanding. We'll see if we can lure him onto the show. Okay,
Sure,
final 2 questions, mate. If you could lead any company in the world other than your own, what would it be?
Listen, I'd say it's probably Airbnb. I think what Airbnb is able to do is get global scale using technology that really is a net positive. So many other technology platforms, it's debatable whether they've added, if it's a net positive to society. But Airbnb, from bringing hosts and guests together to providing opportunities for lovers or families to travel to new places and share new experiences. It's got the best of both worlds. It brings people together, which is wonderful, but it's done it on a truly global scale. So yeah, if I could run Airbnb, that'd be pretty cool.
That'd be really cool, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay, what is a final message of wisdom and hope for the next generation of chiefs?
I think find balance in life before you're forced to. I speak to any senior person in business, and they'll either have been burned out or be going through burnout or are about to go through burnout. And it sort of creeps up on you. You think you're working hard for all the right reasons, but it's just simply not sustainable. And I'm pretty sure no one's died and on their deathbed wished, oh, geez, I wish I could have worked more. And so go on that, do that inner journey and that inner work earlier, and be curious about it and see it as a real tool and a real asset, because I've done a lot of inner work, but I've done it because I've been forced to. And so I really wish that I'd found greater balance. And what I mean by that is, emotional balance, psychological balance, physical, nutritional, sleep, like all those pieces. If I'd realized that they were a crucial part of the toolkit early on, I think things would have been quite different.
That's some fine wisdom to finish, mate. And I'll thank you so much for your contribution, for everything you've done, and for your time today.
Mate, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Righto, Chief. That sums it up for this week in our remarkable chat with Rory Hunter, a man that is leading a new form of build-to-rent industry, and I just cannot wait to see the man go a long way. He's a remarkable man, and in real life, just as humble, engaging, charming, and interesting as you could imagine. All the links and resources for this episode can be found at chiefmaker.com/313. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus on the show bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode.
Righto, Chief. As always, remember to stay epic.